We are joined by Ryan Aber from the Daily Oklahoman. He covers Oklahoma athletics. We're going to talk some OU football here on the show. Ryan, hello, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on this afternoon. How are y'all doing?
Oh, you bet. We love having you on. It's football season, even though it's 1,000,000 degrees out right now. So Oklahoma had an atypical season, to say the least, last year. The rebuild begins. There's hope. They are ranked 20th in the AP preseason poll. Are they worthy of that ranking, and what do they have to do to maybe even be better than that?
Yeah, I think certainly they've got a chance to be worthy of that ranking. It's hard to, picture just how things will go with the rebuild that they've done, especially on the defensive side. A lot of new faces in the transfer portal, which gives you a chance to rebuild maybe a little bit quicker than you could in the past. But at the same time, you never quite know how all of that's going to come together. And then on the offensive side, there's a lot of bright spots. You like what the offensive line looks like, even though they lost a first and a third rounder at the tackle spots. It looks like they could have a chance to be more physical in those positions. And then at running back with Javonte Barnes and even Gavin Sawchuk, who didn't play a ton last year, but we're solid coming back. Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. But, again, some more questions over there, especially at wide receiver, who outside of Jalil Farouk and Drake Stoops are going to be playmakers at the receiver spot. So I think this is as big of a swing between best case and worst case scenario that I can remember, at least on my time during the OU beat. But the schedule gives them a chance to be better record-wise, significantly better record-wise, even if they're a similar team than they were a year ago, because they don't have to play Kansas State, a team that's sort of been a thorn in their side. They don't have to play Texas Tech, who has given them some issues, Baylor. So the schedule's pretty forgiving for them, and then their non-conference schedule with Georgia being taken out thanks to their move to the SEC next year became a lot easier as well. So a pretty wide variety of where things could go, both positively and negatively, with this team.
Yeah, you mentioned the defense, not just one of the worst in the Big 12 last year, but one of the worst in the country, and that's obviously a surprise for a Brent Venables team. So would you say that was schematic? Was that coaching? Was that personnel? And after all they've done in the transfer portal to address that, do they feel that as though it will be improved just based on personnel, or have they made other adjustments too?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was personnel for them last year. One, that they were largely working with a group of players brought in to play Alex Grinch's defense and not Brent Venables' defense, and there was a lot of adjustment to that, most notably with Deshaun White in that cheetah role, which is sort of a hybrid linebacker and defensive back spot, and nobody that they really had fit well into that, but sort of did the best he could there. And then depth at several positions wasn't what they would have liked. Linebackers had to play, 90 to 95% of the snaps last year, and that's just unsustainable when you're trying to do the things that you've got to do to be successful defensively in the Big 12, and then looking forward even next year to that move to the SEC where things take an even bigger step. So they feel a lot better about the depth that they've got this year, both with some of the freshmen that they added, and most notably Peyton Bowen in the secondary, the five-star recruit who wound up choosing them over Oregon at the last minute, sort of even after signing day last year. And then all of the additions that they've made in the portal with Reggie Pearson at safety, but especially in the defensive line when they had Rondell Bothroyd from Wake Forest, Trace Ford from Oklahoma State, who has had some really bright moments. His question has just been, can he stay healthy or not? Davin Sears from Texas State and Jacob Lacey from Notre Dame, and a couple of even newer options with Dejon Terry from Tennessee. So they've got added a lot of bodies there, but a lot of bodies that outside of Bothroyd and Trace Ford are largely unproven at this level.
Ryan Aber, our guest, beat writer for the Daily Oklahoman, covers Oklahoma athletics. as we all know, this is a football program that has had enormous star power. It's not quite that way right now. The AP released its preseason All-America team, first and second. There are no Oklahoma players on that list. I can't imagine that's been the case very often over the past 50 years or so. Are you? What do you think about Brent Venables and his recruiting? Is that star power going to come back?
It certainly looks that way. They've been recruiting better. I mentioned Peyton Bowen there earlier. They've got a couple of similar type guys defensively in next year's class. Now, where they really need to take a big step forward is on the defensive line, and they've been a little bit better, but I think they need to be even better than they've been. If they were able to get David Stone, ultimately that would be a big get for them in improving that defensive line. Missed out on Williams Nwaneri, the kid from the Kansas City area that committed to Missouri. Was a tough loss for them. But generally, recruiting hasn't been an issue. Now, I think at this point, though, they've got to start showing success on the field to be able to sustain that recruiting success, because it becomes a lot more difficult to sell recruits if you can't point to recent success. And they've been able to point to the success of Clemson and other programs where their assistant coaches have been, but it's getting to the point where they're going to have to point out their own success. And if they're not able to turn a corner this year, I think recruiting momentum can slow down really quick.
So we know Dillon Gabriel at quarterback is solid, maybe not spectacular. We also know that last time Oklahoma turned to a freshman in the middle of the season, it started to change the trajectory of that season. And then Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley left for USC. So how safe is Dillon Gabriel with Jackson Arnold, the Gatorade National Player of the Year, behind him? And will they want to give Jackson Arnold some looks there just as they go into the SEC next year?
Yeah, I think you will see Jackson Arnold a little bit. Now, I think they much prefer it if he played a couple of times in those first three games, and then you just sort of put him in a glass case as a break in case of emergency type thing. But I think Dillon Gabriel is pretty solid there. He clearly wasn't the kind of star player that OU has gotten used to at quarterback, but virtually nobody's going to be with the success that they've had at that position over the last decade or so. But there are things certainly that they would like Dillon Gabriel to clear up. I think ideally for them, they would like to ease Jackson Arnold into things, be able to preserve that red shirt, and have Dillon Gabriel improve a little bit in those late game situations and make a little bit better decisions there, but still roll with them. But Jackson Arnold is a really nice option to have if they wind up needing him. Last year when Gabriel went down against TCU, it was a lot of duct tape and chicken wire trying to keep that position together, with how they used Braden Willis and Eric Gray and Marvin Mims and a lot of non-quarterbacks to play quarterback in that 49-0 loss to Texas. They wouldn't be in that position this year because they feel a whole lot better about what Jackson Arnold brings. But if things do go south early in the season, I don't think there's any doubt you're going to start hearing chants of, we want Jackson among the OU fans. We heard it a few years ago when Spencer Rattler struggled. It wound up working out pretty good with them with Caleb Williams. Now, I think Dillon Gabriel's a better quarterback now than Spencer Rattler was then, but Jackson Arnold certainly has the kind of potential to be a Caleb Williams type difference maker. They would just prefer it to be down the line and make that transition next year to the SEC with him starting quarterback and not this year.
Ryan Aber, our guest from the Daily Oklahoman. We're talking Oklahoma football as we begin Big 12 previews. And I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, but Bedlam is such a huge thing in college football, even though Oklahoma has dominated it. That final Bedlam game will happen on November 4th in Stillwater. If I want a ticket for that, what do I need to do?
You better start saving about 5 years ago. I think it's going to be a really hot ticket there in Stillwater. And, heck, they sold out their season tickets for the first time in in quite a while. At one point, they had bundled the Bedlam ticket where you had to buy a season ticket to get that, and they still hadn't been able to reach that level. They reached that level this year, and I think there's a lot of fervor for that game. Obviously, Oklahoma State's a team in a little bit of a transition itself, but they're going to be fired up for that game in Stillwater for sure, and who knows when we're going to see it again. So I think you're only going to see ticket prices for that go up and up, especially if OU and OSU are successful, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to get themselves into the stands for that matchup.
Hey, you got your feet in Oklahoma every day. What is the general mood of Oklahoma State fans when it comes to this move by Oklahoma? Of course, it's been in the works for a long time. It's on the cusp of happening. But what is the mood? Why is that game have such fervor?
Well, I think it started off as OSU fans were, there's a lot of trepidation there with what was going to happen. Would OSU be able to land in a power conference? How would things shake out there when all the cards finish falling? But now that OSU is in a Big 12 that looks, in a really good position to be competitive moving forward with not only the 4 new additions this year, but the new additions coming aboard from the Pac-12 next year, I think it's one of, I'm not quite going to say good riddance, but there's a lot of OSU fans who feel, really good about where they stand, and they're not going to lose a lot of sleep over not being able to play OU every year. I think ultimately that series will be revived somewhere, somehow. I don't know if it'll wind up being able to be an annual thing, but I think it's going to happen at some point. But certainly the mood has changed among Oklahoma State fans, where I think they're a lot more content with the way things have fallen out now than they were a couple of years ago when we first found out this thing, and it looked like maybe the Big 12 could cease to exist. Now the Big 12 is, in a pretty good position behind the SEC and the Big 10, obviously, and significantly behind, but still in solid position to thrive long-term moving forward. And they feel a whole lot better about things than they did back then.
A much softer landing. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, you mentioned the schedule, and OU doesn't play Kansas State, Texas Tech, or Baylor. So just how difficult will it be not only to evaluate Oklahoma, but the entire Big 12 as the season goes along, when there's not really much balance to the schedule?
Yeah, it's going to be weird. One of the big selling points of the Big 12 the last few years has been that, one true champion motto, and talked about playing the round robin and how that helps determine a pretty clear winner. That won't be the case this year. I think certainly that Big 12 championship game takes on a little bit different significance now, just because you're going to see teams that haven't played the same group of opponents, and you're going to have to evaluate in a different kind of way. It's going to be interesting because, we talked about OU's schedule. It's fairly light. You've got a Cincinnati team that's in a big transition. You've got, Central Florida going through a little bit of transition themselves and making that leap up to the Big 12 level. BYU, and then some of the other teams that they play in the Big 12, maybe not ones that you expect to finish at the top. And then in the non-conference side, you've got Arkansas State, Tulsa, and SMU there, so they don't have that marquee non-conference game. So there's certainly evaluation when you talk about not only OU and some of the other ones, but really the league across the board is going to be a lot more difficult this year. But, all the other leagues find a way to do it themselves. So, we'll see how everything shakes out there at the end. But I think certainly in OU's case, it's a positive for them maybe to build a little bit of momentum and potentially get them back into the Big 12 championship game for a final time before they make that leap next year.
All right, good stuff talking Oklahoma football. Before I let you go, I got to mention something professionally. Two friends of mine, especially Barry Trammell, but also Jenny Carlson, leaving the newspaper business, leaving the Daily Oklahoman, starting some other venture. That's big news in your state.
Yeah, it really is, and it was really weird being in our Monday morning meeting this morning without those two. And those two have set the standard for the Oklahoman, for just personally, they sort of set the culture in our newsroom, and not just in the sports department, but period. And been such a big part of. I mean, heck, Barry Trammell's the reason why I became a sports writer, reading him growing up, and it was a great honor to work next to both of them. They are fantastic writers, but even better people. And I know that sort of gets overused, but if it applies to anybody, it applies to those two. And I really hope that this new venture turns out well for them, because they both deserve an incredible amount of success. And they've been such a big part of my career growing up, and also making the Oklahoman what it's been. And we're going to, find a way to move on and have success without those two. But certainly it's going to be strange not sitting next to those guys day in and day out, because they are both fantastic at what they do and who they are.
Very nice, Ryan. Thank you for your time. We'll talk to you down the line.
Sounds great. Always enjoy it. Thank you all for having me on.
You bet. Ryan Aber from the Daily Oklahoman.